In this program, we're going to talk about how to make a sustainable closet using a new mindset with sustainable consumption and sustainable materials. This is the Evolution Show. Welcome to the Evolution Show. I'm your host, Johan Landgren. In this episode, we'll talk about the fashion industry and sustainable clothing. And with me today, I have a special guest, Sophie Gripenberg.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you, nice to be here.
You're very interested in fashion, but in particular, you're interested in sustainable clothing.
Yes.
And you inspire a lot of people, both on, I think, with your traveling. You've been traveling a lot, and you cover your stories in detail, I would say, on Instagram in particular. And you're really dedicated to issues on sustainability.
Yes.
Currently, you're a consultant, and you're head of the Swedish Red Cross in Stockholm when it comes to sustainability. Recently, you were selected one of 33 persons, inspiring persons on sustainability in a Swedish magazine.
Under 30.
Under 30.
33 years
Under
old.
33 years old,
Yes.
exactly. So young people inspiring others, you could say. And you have studied economics, but also peace and conflict studies, like me, actually.
Yeah.
And you have a master's in socio-ecological
Resilience.
resilience
For sustainable development.
At the Stockholm Resilience Institute.
Yes.
Which is also really interesting because it's an interdisciplinary. They have a really interdisciplinary approach, which is very much what we are focusing on here on this channel. And it's also one of my key interests. So it's going to be interesting to hear your thoughts on different matters because they all come together.
Yeah.
And in short, we share a passion for nature, I would say, and the importance of, as I said, the interdisciplinary approach. But today we're going to talk about sustainable clothing.
Yeah.
Maybe you could start to tell us a little bit about your work at the Swedish Red Cross, and you have a number of different projects going on side of that. So, yeah.
Well, at the Swedish Red Cross, I'm coordinating everything related to sustainability. So a part of it is that I'm a project leader for a project called the Sustainability Ambassadors. And it's actually, those are volunteers, and they go out to our local branches and meet other volunteers to educate them about different sustainability topics, and especially to give them like checklists and tools to use. How can I implement a sustainability approach within my voluntary work at the local level? Some of the other projects I'm doing is that I'm helping with the sustainability report we're doing. So we have certain indicators that we are following. And one of them is, of course, our CO2 emissions. So a lot of my time goes to finding ways to how we can reduce our own environmental footprint. But I'm also working things related to finance, or if it's communication, or if it's marketing, and of course a lot of things related to our 300 secondhand shops. We have a unit at the Swedish Red Cross that are working with the secondhand shops, so they are the experts in the field. But I'm assisting them in everything related to sustainability, which is pretty much a lot of it. But so we're doing a tremendous work at the Red Cross with the secondhand shops, because we are getting donations from people and we selling them in our shops, where the money that comes in goes to our humanitarian work, both locally and internationally. It's I started as a volunteer many years ago in a group called Students for Fair Trade. Since I was studying economics, I was interested how we can work with sustainability within trading. And when you put one foot in the Swedish Red Cross, you never get out.
No. And and as I understood it before, you stepped into the Red Cross in Stockholm, there weren't so much discussions on sustainability like it is today. You have, I think, contributed quite a lot to that, as I understood it. And as I said in the beginning, you have an interdisciplinary approach, and I think that's something that we lack in many organizations.
Yes.
So I wouldn't blame the Red Cross for being behind on that matter, because that's I think is a general problem. So that's really interesting that you have that they took you in, and I think it was a great win, I think, for them. I think that because many organizations they tend to work in a certain way, and it's hard to change. And now we have when it comes to sustainability issues, things are changing really fast right now. So you really have to be on your toes.
Yeah.
You have traveled a lot as well, both privately and now, of course, in your work. But if you were to elaborate a little bit on the most important experience you have had, if you think about all the different countries and cultures you have met, and you always in the back of your mind you think about the sustainability. I know and think about the humans you meet and the struggles they have and so on. Could you maybe share a little bit on your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. I would just like to say something about the transdisciplinary background that you've been mentioning, because when I started with peace and development studies, I was actually one of 4 choosing to combine it with economics. And in the end, there was only 2 of us, me and another girl, ending up having a double bachelor degree. Because it's quite hard if you come from a social science to get into economic science. And if you're into economic science, you don't really understand the people working in social science. And I was struggling with that a lot during my bachelor degrees. But when I got to the Stockholm Resilience Center and we started to talk about system thinking, and it was so easy for me to understand some of these global issues and dilemmas because I could see it from both perspectives. And when I said back then I want to be a sustainability consultant, this was just a few years back, people said that there's no such things, we don't need them. And I think now there's actually a lot of people working with sustainability consulting, but finding people to actually understand the system perspective, the system thinking, because there's many areas. And I think one of the benefits we're doing in the Swedish Red Cross is that I'm working directly under the CFO, like the head of economics. And I think it's really important that if any organization or business is serious about sustainability work, I would advise anyone to put them in the leading group. Because sustainability is not just a matter you do afterwards. It needs to be a part of the planning process, and it needs to be a part of the budget. Because sustainability really means, and it's very related to economics, it's how we're handling resources. It's the material resources, it's human resources, and we want them to be effective, right? And the reason why we fail is because we don't have the system perspective. And we don't really calculate all the costs in the right way. So just to take off on that one. When it comes to my travel, some people, when they hear the word travel, it doesn't really go hand in hand with sustainability, because a lot of people think about the impact the flying has, which is completely true. But I also think there's a huge benefit about being out in the world and seeing different things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go there by flying. A lot of my travels I've done by land, and most of the borders I've crossed by land. I was 1 year in Asia, and I didn't fly for, I think it took me 9 or 10 months, because I took the ferry from Indonesia to Malaysia, across the border from Malaysia to Thailand, across the border from Thailand to Myanmar, across the border back to Thailand, across the border to Cambodia, and then back again. So travel doesn't necessarily mean you have to go by airline. And I think for me, my interest in sustainability and what I did at the university was that even though I'm a big fan of philosophy and ideology, and I like to have the empirical approach towards things, it's also that to really get the right tools to make a change, you have to understand humans, and you have to understand their reality, and you have to understand how they view things. Doesn't matter how good you've been calculating, you need to listen to the voices of the people in the area. And I think by traveling and spending time in different places, I learned a lot. I think when I was interviewing farmers, when I did research in Kenya about agroforestry farming, that taught me a lot about sustainable farming for small-scale farmers and their reality, and also how obvious it was that they were so impacted by climate change. It was so evident, like they used to be able to predict exactly how to farm and when to do what, but now they can't anymore because of climate change. And the same thing when it comes to what I saw in Sumatra with the palm oil fields. It's mind-blowing to travel for hours. I was actually on the back of a truck, because I normally hitchhike when I travel. I know a lot of people not a big fan of that, but I have my perspective. I've been hitchhiking with more than 600 people, so I know that people are nice. But anyway, when you watch the palm oil field for just hours and hours, and it's so hot, and I stayed with local people there, and you have to see how they have to walk to fetch water that used to be just on their backyard, and that's more important for me than actually knowing all the facts and figures about deforestation and issue with the rainforest and the palm oil fields.
I guess you've learned also a lot since the topic today is the fashion industry also. I thought that your inspiration from your journey, seeing how people dress. I know that some countries, if you think about Africa, for example, there are a lot of colors, a lot of yellow, and I mean, in our culture, maybe that's kind of striking, sort of standing out. But when you combine this, I think, and you're open-minded, which you obviously are, I think you can learn a lot. Also, and to use clothes that are, I mean, reusing clothes and so on, and finding new ways to combine clothes and so on. Maybe you can tell us a little bit how, I mean, your approach on that.
Yeah, because I don't know if I'm fortunate or unfortunate to be brought up during the time I am, the millennial generation. It could be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing. So when I grew up, everything was about fast fashion. We went for like Fridays after school, we went to shop at the big cheap super malls to have an outfit for the night, and it was always like buying a little like clothes items here and there. It was done on a regular basis. It was not seen as anything like strange, and where you also were used to get a lot of clothes for a cheap price. So like spending 200 crowns, approximately 200 euros, the crown is really low now, but on one item would be expensive. And for me, being someone that was very interested in clothes, and then studying peace and conflict, and I started to dig into the topic of the fashion industry, especially from a human rights perspective, where I learned a lot through fair trade about the working conditions of the people producing our clothes. It was really hard for me, because I kind of wanted to neglect it, and like, okay, I'm doing good in other fields, I don't really want to care about the clothing. But after a while, you're kind of like, I can't do this I can't have this kind of lifestyle anymore. So I started to do a lot of research, trying to find better brands, doing more sustainable things. And I started to also explore the secondhand market way more. And that was also a big gap, because secondhand was almost viewed as something like, that's just for people who have no money, and it's dirty clothes and they smell bad. But when you start to go into it, you realize now, like, it's a golden mine. You can find very, very, very nice items for a very, very low price. But I had a few years. I did break up with my passion for fashion because it didn't go hand in hand with my values. I was also traveling and living abroad a lot. So I been. The last 10 years, I haven't stayed in a place for more than 8 months. So to have a big closet didn't really make sense. Uh-huh. So I've also learned the art of being minimalistic since I'm moving around so much, or I have been moving around a lot. And I think now, since I've been back in Stockholm for more than a year, I've been been doing a lot of research, and it seems like a lot of things are coming up. Which I'm glad to see, that now it feels like the industry and also people are more ready to change, because it has to. Yeah. Maybe
that's the point we can continue on before we go into what you can do and so on.
Yeah.
So why is it a big problem right now, and what's the biggest challenges? Because obviously we cannot continue to consume the way we are. If
No.
people in, let's say, China would copy our lifestyle in terms
Yeah.
of fashion and so on, there's basically we need 3 or 4 planets.
Yes.
It's not going to work. So
Yeah.
what's the biggest challenges you think we have?
Well, we Swedes in general consume 4.2 planets. So if everybody would live like Swedes do, we need a lot of resources, and that's just because our big environmental footprint is it's international. The way we consume is creating environmental problems in other areas, and when it comes to climate change globally, of course. So, and 80% of all the textiles and clothes we're using is imported. And that has increased a lot. Now, in average, we're consuming 14 kilos per person and year of textiles. So that's not only clothes; it could also be textiles, pillows, or whatever. And that has increased a lot. Like I think it's about 3 or 4 kilos in just 10 years. So it's changing in a very fast period of time. In a short period of time, it's been changing fast. And about 3 kilos of that goes to secondhand shops. So we buy things and then we donate them. But we have 7 kilo, that's 7.5, that basically go into the bin. So the problem is that we're consuming a lot that we don't really use, that we don't really need. And I think I've read somewhere it's like 1/3 of everything we buy we don't even use. So we go out there, do a lot of shopping, it stays in the wardrobe, it goes to the bin, it's not even used. And the problem, if you look at the clothes, you have to do a life cycle assessment, because this is really important. If you want to talk about a certain environmental impact of an item, you need to look at the whole production chain. I mean, from the fibers you're using towards the making of the clothes, towards transportation, and then it's used by consumers. And there's been doing research about this. I think everybody should Google Sandra Roos if someone wants to look more into the research she's been doing. And Mistra Future Fashion could also be something where people dig into, because she's been doing a lot of research in this. So 56% of the impact of the clothes actually comes from the fiber you're using. So it's really when you produce something, that's the largest environmental impact. And that was not surprising. We kind of know that, and we assumed that was the case. But the other another one is 22% of the life cycle assessment of clothes in general. It's an average. It will depend on what kind of item it is actually from the transportation to the store. Because a lot of these like fast fashion consumption and buying a lot of clothes, you actually take your car to a shopping mall and then you go back home. And of course, there's always an impact with washing, but that's very low compared to how it's produced in other countries.
I read something somewhere that I think 2,700 liters or something just to make a t-shirt, and 10,000 liters of water to make a pair of jeans.
Yeah.
And that has a huge impact on big lakes like the Aral Lake, LOC, which is basically gone now because of irrigation in the farming area. For
Uzbekistan.
Yes, for the cotton fields.
Yeah.
And water shortage is one of the major challenges we have, as people for Swedish audience already know that Sweden is one of the countries in the world which are fortunate enough to have fresh water in abundance. But even in Sweden now, we have a huge problem in certain areas because of drought, because of shortage of rain and so on. So affecting the farming and so on. So even here, we have to start change our approach on this. So that's really interesting. And do you have an idea how can we address, for example, the problem with using water in such an abundance? Are there ways we can go around that, or?
I mean, I think because what you mentioned is actually the cotton industry. Yeah, cotton requires a lot of water. Like if you look at everything that's being farmed globally, 1% of it is actually cotton, which might not seem like a lot. But I mean, in India, or like in general, I think that's about 23% of all chemicals used in the world goes to the cotton industry. So it requires a lot of water, but it requires also a lot of chemicals. And I mean, some would probably argue that why we don't just do it organic, like because that will actually require less chemicals, but I mean the use of water wouldn't change that much, and you would probably need more workers, and you can't really have the same you can't really guarantee that the harvest will be the same. It might be a lower, so it will be way more expensive. So that won't solve the whole issue with the water, just making everything organic, even though only 1% is organic of all the cotton produced globally, which is a very small number. What it does, organic cotton, is that it's at least is better for workers being in contact, because a lot of cotton is picked by hand. So organic ones are better for the workers, might not necessarily be more economic better for the farmers in the short run. But there's been a lot of research of like increasing the volume of tencel or like cellulose, like other kinds of fiber that comes from the forest, wood-based fiber. That what we call them in English. And yeah, I mean that's better from a water perspective, and I think if you measure the CO2 probably, but I mean even if we would replace all the newly produced clothes with fibers like cellulose, that might have a huge impact when it comes to like water use and those things. But it's more complex than that, because where will it be grown and for where will it come? I mean, these industries are employing a lot of people, so it's not only about stopping something and just going somewhere else. And if we want to do it naturally in Sweden, people say we have an abundance of forests, but we also have a challenge with biodiversity. And now everything is going to be based on biofuels, and we want to run airlines on the forests, and now we want to produce clothes on the forest. So I think if that's going to be a change, you really need to calculate if that's actually makes sense. And I think that debate is missing, because it's not only the interest of people having a certain economic viewpoints, but it's actually like, does it really make sense? Can we quantify this? So I don't have a clear answer. I think we do need innovation and new kinds of fiber in a way to produce things. I think we should talk a little bit more about what's coming up. But it's definitely changing the way we consume, because the clothes today, like the last 15 years, like the lifespan of how long we use them has shortened because it's poorer quality. And there's so many good quality fibers out there that we don't really use.
No. We'll come back to like kind of practical approach we can do then. But just as a follow-up on the synthetic fibers, I read about this company, a startup in Finland called Spinnova, and they had a pilot plant right now where they used developing a method that they use cellulose from forests in Finland, but I also read that they imported trees from Brazil. And then I thought, like, well, is the reason for that? Is it cheaper to, or just, are they cutting down the forest like they are, I'm afraid, in Amazon on an increasing level right now? That's a topic for another program. But cutting down forest is the opposite of what we need to do, obviously, as you know. I mean, we need to grow more trees.
Exactly.
So I cannot see that as a solution. I can see that as maybe a development for some new synthetic fiber that might be, if you use like waste from the industry when you're cutting down trees and so on. Sure, but cutting down trees just to get cellulose, in my mind, doesn't sound in a sustainable way forward at all. So, but how about wool, for example? It's often mentioned that maybe we can have a lot of sheep and have farming that is sustainable as well and organic, obviously, and then they have a nice life, and we have huge farms, but in a nice way, so to speak. Is that an alternative?
Yeah, I mean, just something on that Spinnova thing is that what's happening when it comes to innovations of doing recycling is that we today don't have the technology to, like, for my old t-shirt, to put down the fiber and make a new t-shirt. So what's happening with the new things that are from a recycling perspective, it's almost always leftovers. So like I think it was Renewcell, another company. They using, if I remember the company right now, they're using leftovers from the wood industry, if I understand it right, to make those kind of fibers. And the same with another company, Swedish Stockings. Some of their nylon stockings comes from, like, for example, fishing nets. Or in some of the polyester that's like recycled polyester is not from an old polyester clothes. It's actually might be done from PET bottles, like plastic bottles. So like it's a step towards a more like circular economy or circular use of resources, but it's not completely recirculable within the fashion industry per se. So it's actually and it's really. And the reason is like to wash something and take out all the bacteria from a used clothes is actually a very expensive process. So this research going on in this field, there might be a lot of things been pumping up that I'm not aware about. But today it's not circular, but things are happening to make it more circular. So yeah.
And I think if you look at this on a kind of broader picture, a big picture. I mean, the main point, I think, for many companies right now is that to make resources, I mean, people take for granted now that you could just buy something and waste it and throw it away. For companies that produce stuff, it's easy to get rid of stuff. It doesn't cost them anything. Yeah. There's no cost involved, basically. Yeah. Someone else pays. Either it's the nature or someone taking care of the waste and so on. So maybe we have to think about making it easier for companies to realize that they can make it's in their interest to use the fibers, to use the final product. Moving back to what you said, the circular economy, including that in a system that they can actually make money or save money by including this in a circular economy. But there are not so many examples that I can think of where they have this in a bigger, in a general environment where it's really working for a factory or a whole society. So we're kind of, learning as we go right now. Yeah. But it's really... The sheeps. The sheeps, and maybe we shouldn't like looking for, the golden solution, one key solution, but we have to think about many different.
But I think the sheep is really interesting because I was, 2 months ago, I was visiting Skaparfestivalen, it's called. It's a creation festival at Gotland. There's a tradition in Sweden of this kind of work, how to recycle, how to reuse, how to remake. Reuse and remake is quite broadly used words even in Sweden, in Swedish, of what you can do with old items of clothes. I mean, the best thing for the environment is not to melt down the fiber and create a new fiber. Is actually, how can I use this t-shirt as something else? But during this festival I did talk to a new brand called Basta. That's they're not sponsoring me. I'm just mentioning them. No one sponsors me. But they are doing they're trying to create high couture of wool, and like hats and a jacket, and it's really nice. And because now today in Sweden, I think it's 2/3 of all the wool produced in Sweden is getting burned. I mean, it's like it's this high quality material, and at the same time we importing like wool mostly from New Zealand of a value of like, I think it was 10 million or if it was billion, but I mean it's insane. We have this like high quality material in Sweden, and the sheep farmers mostly have sheep farms due to the meat, but the reason why is because that the consumers the producers or the brands doesn't really want to pay the fair price. Because if you want to cut the sheep and then you have to wash the wool and then you have to prepare it, and it's cost money to do that in Sweden. Just cutting the wool, it's like they might get just like 5 crowns per kilos. I read somewhere, could be different. And I think the person, they compare it with like other countries where they would they at least need to get like 12 or maybe 28 crowns per kilo, So it's a huge difference, and to make it profitable for them to do it. And it's the same with the washing. If you do it in another country, it might be around there as well. I think 12, 20 or something crowns per kilo. But if you want to do it in Sweden, it's 45 crowns, right?
Yeah, and they probably use a lot of chemicals as well when they wash them.
Yeah, so if you want to do it locally produced, you need to pay actually what it's cost for the producers to do it, and then you need to price that clothing items according to what it's actually worth, and then consumers need to be ready to pay that fair price, because wool is a high quality material. And I think also the fashion consumers today, or the clothes consumers, they don't really know how to take care of the clothes anymore, because it's like this fast consumption pattern where we buy something, throw it away, buy something. So if you want to make it last, you also need to create new kinds of behavior of how to actually look after those material, because it's a different way of doing it. But I also read that it's actually less sheep now in Sweden than people. I think it was like 600,000 of them, and I think I read it was about 1,800 tons of wool in Sweden, and I mean most of it it's not even used.
No.
But I think also a challenge for the fashion industry, and especially some of the Swedish brands that be looking into starting to make Fjällräven, another company, were making clothes out of wool from Sweden, is that there's no big industry of wool in Sweden today. So to lower the cost, you need to actually create a better system for it that we probably had a long time ago.
Yeah.
But
just to mention a place, I mean, in Dalarna, there is a factory in Sågmyra, and where it used to be in the Scandinavian, the biggest wool factory in Scandinavia, and they built, the interior for the Volvo cars and for the military. The young soldiers going to the military, all their clothes and so on, it was wool, and it was high quality. And then of course there was, during the 70s, like most big industries in Sweden, we started to import a lot of stuff, and it was cheaper, and basically was cotton from Asia and so on. So step by step they closed the factory. But it's interesting, they're still selling blankets of wool, high quality from that factory. And it's good to mention, I think most people don't realize that even though wool is really expensive, if you take care of it, the clothing you have, just for example, if it's like smelly, you just hang it out, and it's fresh. You don't have to put it in the washing machine, which obviously tears down the clothes.
And today we add chemicals in our clothes to have the same functioning as wool has naturally, which is also quite insane. All these sporting clothes, I think that's actually one thing that worries me, is because with the trend with the sports and the new kind of fabrics, and most of them is like oil based, and with all that chemicals, all the mix of different fibers, it's difficult to separate them. So they basically just become trash. There's no economic value in them. Which is very, very sad, but that's why wool is so good, because it's regulates itself.
but just so that's a huge challenge. Obviously, we have the production side, we have our sentiment, our habits. That's really buy and waste, buy cheap, throw it away, buy something new. But how can we change that mindset? I think we've touched upon it. Like. You've traveled around, you've seen, you're inspired by stuff you buy, and how if I'm a girl or a guy, I want to buy something that I feel comfortable in. Where do I go, and how should I think when I go to the store?
I mean, what people need to start with is a new relationship towards their closet. I mean, it's really the same process that we're in when it comes to food. It's like, how do we view food? What are we used to eat? It's really about changing patterns and behaviors. So it's the same thing with your closet. What everybody should do is go through their closet, actually count what kind of items do they have of pants, of jackets for different seasons, how often do they use them. If there's stuff there that you haven't used, like in Sweden we have different seasons, so we probably make sense to look like a year back. They shouldn't be there. They don't add any value in the society. They should be in a second-hand shop to give value somewhere else for someone else. So that's the first thing, just get rid of everything. I mean, if you don't use it, it doesn't belong there. And if you do have an attachment to a certain item because it's like, oh, I used it on my prom, or I used it at my first day at work or whatever, give it to a friend or a family member. Say like, you can use it for some time. And if you really miss it, then you can take it back, right? So that's also a good way to test if you're ready to let it go.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. So and before you go and consume things, try to be aware of what kind of style do I have, what kind of lifestyle. And when I say style, it's not about being interesting in how you want to look. It could be interesting in how you want to feel. If I'm having an active lifestyle, if I spend more time at work. Some people have a lot of stuff for parties, but like honestly, I'm going to party 4 or 5 times a year. Maybe not a good idea to make that the biggest part of your closet. If you're an active person, I work out twice or once a day, that would probably make sense to have a proper closet for that. So you need to identify what kind of lifestyle you have, and you also need to identify what kind of environment you're operating in. Like if you're in Sweden during the winter, you need good clothes for the winter. And all those summer clothes you're having, maybe you don't need so many of them. So I think it's a lot about trying to get to know yourself and what you wear and why you wear it and how you want to feel. Don't buy things because they're in a magazine and this is what's trendy now, if you don't feel comfortable by wearing it. And then when you go and look for stuff, some of the most important thing you can do is to rent. And circle, like exchange with friends or people you know. That sometimes in Sweden we actually have these natural days of a clothes changing event. Some people do it at work. You can do it by yourself. And the third thing is of course the secondhand shopping, because that has the least environmental and social impact. And also when you do rent for minor companies, I mean there's some in Sweden, they're small scale companies. You want to support those entrepreneurs. And if it's a secondhand shop, most of those money go to humanitarian work or other kind of work, which is also very, very good. So these things are adding something into the economy. But if you want to buy something that's new because you can't find it at a secondhand shop, there's some things that are better than others. There's degrees of, I would call like a sustainable produced cloth. And I mean, some people here, it's actually something about our values as well. For some people it might be more important to look at the social part when it comes to working conditions or supporting local entrepreneurs. For some people it might be climate change, the lower CO2 impact. For some people it might be other environmental, water or something like that. So I think it would be difficult to say this is the most sustainably produced brand or item of clothes, and this is the least, because that has a little bit to do what we're valuing here, but I think also people need to learn how to rent and buy secondhand, because it's a different way of shopping, and it's a skill you develop.
So how about recycling stuff then?
Yeah.
If you have something at home,
yes,
I have quite a lot of shirts bought through the years. I try to buy high quality shirts because they tend to last longer. But for example, the color, it wears out after a while. And what I try to do at least is that when I put it in the washing machine, I lower the rotations per minute, because I know it tears on the cloth. But that's just a minor thing. It in the long run they will still worn out. So where should I turn if I have stuff? Do I go to a second hand place, or what can I do?
When it comes to the washing, there's actually washing bags you can buy. That's actually also collects the microplastic, like everything that's made of polyester, like if it's a fleece or they like give tons of microplastic, thousands of microplastic when you wash them. And I mean the first time you wash them is the worst ones. Like that's the one that they give the most microplastic, and they are actually good. Not only for like polyester and those kind of fibers, but they're actually good because exactly what you're saying. They're protecting the clothes like from washing. So to have a few of those bags is very clever if you wash your clothes. But yeah, I mean, if anything that should be given to secondhand should actually be an item where you feel like this is something I could give to a friend. Because what's happening at the secondhand shops that it's most of the time it's actually volunteers who's doing the sorting, and what can't be sold in the store because it might be like a lot of colors on it, or it might be too like broken and smelly, or like it's not something anyone would buy. The secondhand shop need to throw it away somehow. I know that like for the Swedish Red Cross, for example, we have our own textile recycling system. So we are collaborating with 2 partners in Germany who has these like huge textile sortings factories, and there's no way today in Sweden that where you can fully recycle your clothes. We believe that around it's like 7,000 tons of textiles are being collected by different secondhand agencies, and most of them, like the Swedish Red Cross, have a collaboration, because if we didn't have that, we need to go and throw it away and it would get burned. But since we want to take environmental responsibility, we're collaborating with partners in Germany where they are once again might sell things on secondhand markets, but that's within the European Union, because that's the deal, to keep it in the European Union. And that has to do that there's clothes on the market in Sweden that people don't want to buy, but they might be interesting for other consumers in other markets. And some of these companies also have this zero waste philosophy, which means that the fibers they can't, or like the clothes they can't sell, they use the fibers for other materials such as isolation materials, for example. But as I said, it's not possible to recycle clothes to become a new item of clothes. And they will become like fibers instead for isolation or things like, which is way better than get burned, of course. But yeah, it's the responsibility of the municipality to handle the waste, and I'm surprised that Sweden hasn't come. I mean, we should be way ahead than we are.
One of the questions I asked Anna Pannestål, my previous guest, if she would like to forward any questions for you, and since she is in the transport industry and so on, she asked like, okay, let's say that there are more and more companies coming now, let's say in Stockholm, for example, that they want to sell secondhand clothing, they want to deliver them from door to door, which is something that people demand more and more now. And who knows, in the near future, we might even have self-driving cars and trucks going everywhere. Yeah. So, but what can happen then is that they're not packed. The packages are not packed the same way. They're not as efficient as in a factory or in a centralized company where they just distribute everything from one place. So there is like a lot of space, empty space inside the trucks. Yeah. When you have something like a sofa or a table or something like that, that's already mounted. So her concern was, or her question was, that it might lead to more traffic on the roads if you have a lot of secondhand stuff going everywhere. How can we address that so we don't have more transports as a result? Of course we don't want that, and she would also add that she thinks it's a great idea, but just how can we address that?
I think it's an important question, because I think one of the issue with the secondhand market is that, well, if this item or this jacket was, instead of south parts of Stockholm, in north parts of Stockholm, or not even in Stockholm, maybe it was in Luleå or Umeå, it might have been sold, right? Because that's where the consumer that wants to buy it is. So I think a way to lower the waste and what's actually not being reused again is actually to have a better match of the item and the consumer that's willing to buy it. And I think that will require better ways to centrally sort the clothes and centrally match the clothes. But it has to do with e-trade as well. I mean, we can see in Sweden that all the bigger fashion industries are, they are very challenged by the market these days. And one of them, the ones that I grew up with, GCN, has been shut down. And so so the e-trade on the opposite is going up. So I think if we really want to take care of the clothes we're having, we need to find better ways to match it with consumers. And that means an increase in transportation. But once again, you have to do a life cycle assessment, right? So if we decide, I think I haven't read any report about it, but I think when H&M decided to do the collaboration with Sirius Group, I'm not sure if they're using them anymore. They did that, like, okay, so if we collect clothes, send them to Germany to be sorted, is that actually environmentally better than like letting people have them and burn them? And I guess this answer was yes. So yeah, you have to calculate that increase in transportation in comparison with what would happen with the clothes otherwise, and it will only make environmentally sound if it's a reduction, right? But I mean, in Sweden, there is a central sorting. Central sorting, that's what it calls. A place where you can centrally sort clothes, which is called Vargön Innovation, which is outside Vänersborg, and they are doing a lot of like different projects related to innovation when it comes to textiles. Because I think that I am not sure about the figure. I think it was 80,000 or 85,000, but what the Environmental Protection Agency said that's actually how much we need to collect, and we only collect about 7,000 or something around that. So we have this like huge challenge of like collecting all these clothes to make sure that we don't put them in the bin and then spread them out so that they actually reach the right consumers, and that will increase the transportation. But I think there was a project, I think is still running, called Älskade Stad in Stockholm, with the Bring and Stockholm Stad and some, and that's, I think that's a really clever idea to not only look at your own sector, but trying to, how can we match it with other sectors to find a better way doing it. At the Red Cross in Gotland, there are several minor stores. They have centrally sorting a place outside Visby. So the local stores, the secondhand shops, they can give like wishing lists of like, we need more toys or we need more winter jackets, and they also will like give lists of, this is what we have too much. I mean, we're not at the moment, we're getting too many pants and we don't need that much pants. So every time they go out with things that they wish that have been coming in from other places, they also bring the overused textiles back. So they have this circling route where the truck is never empty. It's always full. And they've been creating this regional system. So I think to solve that issue, we need to talk to other actors as well. And I think this probably need to be based on a regional or local level to make this much so efficient as possible.
Just an idea I thought about was that there are more and more people starting this kind of flea markets, spontaneous flea markets, where you basically go to a parking lot, or so you tell people in advance, you have a social group or something, and you say, okay, I'm going to have this and this, and I'm going to have my little truck, and I'm going to sell this, come and join me, and maybe you're interested. Maybe that could also be a way of just localizing also, because if you're living in a neighborhood and there are quite a lot of people, you can just tell people, if you have a group and you go there and you say that, I'm gonna sell my clothes now, if others want to join me and buy or sell, maybe we can do that together. And using social media, that's my point. I think that could also be maybe something we could could work with there.
Yeah, exactly.
So so we've touched about that, but how do we encourage people if the big challenge is breaking, being attracted by trends all the time and so on? If you're young, I think it's more tricky. Maybe you're 14, 15 and you have this pressure that you should have this kind of brand and things like that. But I mean, if people check out your Instagram, I will encourage people to do that. You can see that you have a bunch of different kind of clothing, and I think most of it maybe you have bought on second hand. So I buy a lot of it secondhand. It's also a lot of leftovers from, I have two sisters and a mother. Yeah, but that's, I mean, it's still.
So, and a lot of things, I do have a few items I've been using for many, many years. Like the pants I'm wearing today, I had them for 7 years. They're not sustainably produced in the first place, but I use them a lot. And a few things are actually from brands that are like coming up, that are new. which I think doing a great job. I also know a woman who runs a sustainable store, like a fashion store, called Ecosafair. She's not sponsored me either. I think she's just doing a great job to trying to find those like more newly produced brands that are actually trying to make a difference. So I mix it with a few new items that comes from brands or collections I want to support, and something that a lot of leftovers and a lot of secondhand. I'm very lucky at my office is above a secondhand shop. And the way I view it is that, for example, I actually go there sometimes and I buy a sweater because it's getting cold during that day. But I do hand it back if I don't use it. So I use like the secondhand market a little bit as a place to rent, you know, because I know the money's doing something good. So if I buy something for 100, 200 crowns, if you have the economy, I mean, not everybody has that, you can just give it back if you're not sure about it. But when it comes to secondhand, I mean, one important advice is that if you're not a person that remake things naturally, like if you don't have a sewing machine at home or something, don't buy things and think you will change them. Because that was a fault I did in the beginning. I was buying a dress and I was like, oh, I'm going to remake it this and this. I never did that, and honestly, I don't spend so much time of being that creative. I have other friends of mine who are really geeky about it, but if you don't do that, just don't buy things because you think you will remake them. The other thing is that to be very specific about what kind of things you're missing in your wardrobe. So by having a good outlook of what do I miss, like to be able to use all my clothes. If I have certain kinds of pants or sweaters, is there anything that's missing that will actually increase my use of these? It might be the perfect jacket, or it might be a nicer shoes. And when you go for secondhand, you go there and you spend time just looking. You don't go there with a fixed idea of what you will get. You go there with open mind and feel like you might find the perfect summer dress during the winter. But yes, and then there are a few brands that I think you need to also to be ready that instead of doing a lot of shopping on cheaper brands, actually just pick a few items per month that you really, really need, and be ready to pay what it actually costs. So if you buy something new, you need to see what is the lifespan of it. Because actually to put, I know everybody doesn't have the economy to afford anything, but if you look at it, 5,000 crowns for a winter jacket that you're going to wear for 25 years, it's not a lot of money. Because if you calculated how much money it costs per time you're using it, it's not much. So we need to be ready to actually do what we used to do, save up money for higher quality. And a note on that is that just because something has a higher price doesn't necessarily mean it's better quality. You need to find out yourself. That's, for example, if you buy a new pair of jeans you should really look for jeans at secondhand shops, because jeans has a huge environmental impact if you compare many other, because there's so much cotton used in it, and chemicals. But try to go for secondhand. But if you do buy a new ones, buy ones that actually are whole, not with a lot of holes in it and these things, because that's something you should definitely go for secondhand, so it will last longer.
Yeah, really good, a lot of good advice there. Just to move a little bit back to the production, how do we encourage the more local production? I mean, if you mentioned Sweden, that it's and this is the same all over the world. Basically, a lot of things is made in Asia because you have cheap labor and so on. The cost of environmental damage is, you don't see it here. It's happened somewhere else. It's not on your backyard. So we talked about wool and things like that and recycling. But are there any ways we could try to improve or make it easier? Is it a political decision, or is it something we should think about as an entrepreneurial approach, or how do we make it easier?
It has to do, of course, political decisions is important for what you define as waste. I'm not a geek when it comes to law and regulations, but I know there's challenges if you call something a waste, you're not actually allowed to sell it again. if I remember it correctly. So there needs to be changes on that actually encourage circular use of material in general, not only for the fashion industry. So that needs to be changed, so we can better take care of everything. I also think it's like we definitely need to educate both producers and consumers in these issues, because what I see a little bit is greenwashing, you know, where you kind of come up with this new collection that's called sustainably produced, and just because you have organic cotton doesn't mean it's sustainable. You still have the issue with the working conditions, you still have the issue with the chemicals, you still have the issue with the shipping or even flying, and there's still, like, if you don't have a sustainable business model in the first place, I think that should be looked at. And I can see now that consumers are getting so much more aware that I think that you won't last in the sector if you don't have a business plan that's sustainable, a business model that's sustainable. But I don't think it's about a lot about a dialogue from brands. There's a lot of brands in Sweden that have been doing that. I mentioned Fjällräven. Another one is Filippa K. Like, actually asking the sheep farmers, you know, go there and like, how can we collaborate? What's necessary? What do we need to do to make it a profitable business for you and a profitable business for us? But then, of course, it's up to the consumers, because if we're not ready to use what's already produced, and if we're not ready to get the facts of actually what's a sustainable item and what is not. But of course, not everyone can know everything about everything.
No.
There needs to be good regulations of how to call something sustainable. And I think the certifications do help. One of them is like GOTS, GOTs for textiles, which is a good indicator, because that's there's some standard criterias and they can follow. But at the same time, it's more difficult for small scale like producers or brands to use those kind of certification marks, because they could be expensive. So yeah, it is a challenge. I don't have the answers of who should do what. I think it needs to be addressed in several levels.
Yeah, but I think just to summarize a little bit some of your core points, because it's good to come back to them. I think first of all, if you want to build your wardrobe, your closet, think about what you need and sort out what you don't need.
Yes.
And in the long term, that the result of that is that we probably will start to consume less. We need less clothes, which means we need less cotton, we need less wool, and so on. And then we have less of a problem, because I think in a couple of years only, they're talking about the industry, the cotton industry and the apparel industry, the fashion industry, that we will have problems with access to enough resources when it comes to cotton and so on. So we need to cut down. And you also encourage innovation, so you're open for new, maybe synthetic fibers, so on, but still you know that it has to be in balance with what we need, and that the first priority is that, if I understood you correctly, is to buy less stuff, or buy the things you need, but not unnecessary stuff. And recycle, finds new ways. There are a lot of ways to recycle and reuse. When you buy stuff, look for secondhand first and foremost, and that you definitely can buy good stuff, probably even better sometimes, many times. And if people want to see that I'm just not talking here, you can check out your Instagram, for example. And before I move on, I just also would like to mention that you have a book you're working on, and you're also working on a new homepage. So I can, once that is up, I can put a link in this video, and I will mention it maybe in a later program, because I hope we'll talk more. Maybe you would like to tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me. And I mean, we've been touching a few things, and there's so many things to discuss and say. So anyone who feels like, why didn't you guys talk about this and this and this and that? I mean, of course, we can do a whole show just about the fashion industry and sustainability. And my new website is actually about this, because I think there's a huge gap between people who are environmentally oriented and are kind of ready to just stop consuming for the sake of our planet, and the fashion industry, where you have people that actually are not willing to put style aside And I see now that those things can go hand in hand. So my website is actually for people who are interested in fashion and style, to learn how they can make minor changes. But the book is about, it's a biography, I think I would call it. It's about my personal experience of anxiety and depression. I'm very happy and feeling very well today, but that wasn't the case. I was diagnosed with depression for like, it was 3 years ago. And I promised, I was really sick then. I didn't want to live. And I promised myself, when I choose to live, that I will be happy. I will be the happiest version of myself I could ever be. And I will write about a book about it. So that book is a promise to myself, and it has motivated me to actually become very healthy. And I want to inspire others that are struggling with mental illness, because I think our personal well-being goes very much hand in hand with global sustainability topics and issues. So I want to encourage more people to see that there's actually a way to be completely free, to be happy and at peace, and not depressed or anxious.
Yeah, sounds really really interesting, and I look forward to reading that. So great. Maybe I just thought I have to add something. It's that when you talk about anxiety and so on, maybe a lot of people are affected also about this super consumption we have, that we are super stressed out. We always expect people to buy stuff. You expect to wear this, and it's a small part of it, obviously, but it can affect a lot of people, I guess. So maybe you will elaborate something on that in your book. I don't know,
of course, the whole way we live today, and this fast way of living, and it's definitely related, I think.
If people are interested in your work and what you're doing, where can they find you? Is it
at
Instagram?
My website,
at your website? And that's sophiegripenberg.com.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was really interesting. I learned a lot. And I look forward to having you back on the show. We talked about it, that maybe we can have, there's so many topics we can cover. But we share a lot of common interest in the sustainability issues and so on. So I hope to have you back soon.
Both of us are interested in many different kinds of topics related to sustainability. So
I look forward to have you back on the show, Sophie. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoy this conversation as well, feel free to keep the conversation going in the comments below. As always, we appreciate your feedback. Was it good or bad? I hope to see you in 2 weeks for the next episode.